Welcome to Route 67. Glad you could join us this morning, or hope you're enjoying the weather out there. I hope it gets nicer and nicer. Last week we ended with a question, and the question was, what was I eating? You'll have to go back and look at it if you were wondering. But Noah, you were right. So good job. It was sashimi, not sushi, sashimi, and the country we'd most likely find that in is Japan. Well, last week we looked at worldview, kind of how we see the world. And everybody sees the world through their own eyes, their own experiences, their own culture, their own country, and even their own family, and even us here, maybe our own church. And so we looked at worldview. And we ended a little bit with, how did Jesus see the world? Or what things did Jesus value in his world? Because what we value also tells us a lot about our worldview. Well, if we look through the Gospels, that's Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, we would find that Jesus valued relationships. How do we know that? Well, he hung around with a bunch of guys, 12 of them, and they were kind of his traveling group that he went a lot of places with. He enjoyed being with them. There was relationship there. But not only did he have relationship with those 12, there was 3, Peter, James, and John, that he had a closer relationship with. And if we boil it down even farther, we would probably be able to decide from reading a few things here and there that John was Jesus' best friend. And it's great. If you got a best friend, I'm glad for you. Having a good friend is awesome. But what else? What other people did Jesus value? Well, he valued people that were not like him, people that were often in their culture on the outside looking in on the in people. So some of those were lame people, some of them were blind, some of them were people who had skin disease that nobody wanted to touch, and yet Jesus would go and touch them, and he would not be contaminated by them. He would heal them. So that was really cool. There was also some smart people that Jesus interacted with. I think of Nicodemus. He was a really smart guy. He was kind of a rabbi. He was a Pharisee. And he came to Jesus, and he had some pretty good questions to ask Jesus, and he was trying to figure out who Jesus was. Another group of people that Jesus interacted with for a brief time in Matthew 18 was children. Jesus loved children. And we think, well, lots of people love children. But in that culture there, children are maybe not as valued as our culture today. So Jesus valued children. Now there is one guy we're going to look at a little bit today, and it's found in Luke chapter 19. And he was a wealthy guy, but he had gotten his wealth through some not so good ways. And you'll probably remember this story, but we're going to look at it just a little bit. This guy's name was Zacchaeus. Yeah, he was just a little guy. And one day Jesus was coming into Jericho, and there was lots of people lined up on the sides of the road to see Jesus. They wanted to have a good look at him. And so did Zacchaeus. The problem was Zacchaeus couldn't see over anybody because he was so short. So he figured, I could solve this problem. He looked down the road there was a tree. So he ran down, climbed up in the tree, and there he is waiting for Jesus to pass by. And as Jesus comes along, lo and behold, he stops right in front of the tree, and he looks up at Zacchaeus and he says, "Zacchaeus, come on down. I'm coming to your house today." And if we read the story there, we find that Jesus goes and spends probably the day with Zacchaeus. They eat and they have lots of conversation. At the end of the day, Zacchaeus gets up and he makes an announcement to everybody. Zacchaeus was a tax collector, not the most favorite person in the community. And in fact, Zacchaeus had got a lot of his wealth by overcharging people at times and making his little bank account bigger and bigger through dishonest gain. So he wasn't liked by a lot of people. But at the end of the day, he gets up and his heart has been transformed by his encounter and his time with Jesus. And he gets up and he says, "You know what? If I've ripped anybody off, If I've done anything like that, I'm going to make it right with you, and I'm going to pay you back way more than I took from you illegally. See, when Zacchaeus met Jesus and had a real encounter with him, his life was transformed and it was changed. And he started to see the world a little bit differently. He started to see Jesus differently, and Jesus had a big impact on his life. That was wonderful. At the end of that little story, Jesus says, the Son of Man, referring to himself, came to seek and to save those who were lost. Oh, he's talking about Zacchaeus. Zacchaeus was lost. Now, I don't know about you, but most people I talk to, especially if you're a little bit older, have a lost story. A story where you were lost. I have one of those too. When I was about 3 years old, we went to a church picnic. This was out in White Rock in the Vancouver area. It was beautiful. The ocean was there. There's train tracks, big green grass park, playground for kids, and a big gravel parking lot with lots of cars in it. Now, for me, being 3 years old, and I remember being really small because I couldn't see over the top of the backs of the cars. So I found myself in a parking lot on the gravel stuff there, lots of dust, cars going by, and I found myself by myself. That was scary. I looked around. I couldn't see my mom. I couldn't see my dad. I couldn't see anybody I knew. And I did the only thing a very scared little 3-year-old boy could do. I burst into tears and I cried as loud as I could because I was terrified because I was lost. Now, I remember probably a teenage girl coming along and going down going, "Oh, little boy, are you lost?" Well, stranger danger. What do you do when somebody comes towards you to maybe help you, but I didn't think she was trying to help me? You cry even louder. Fortunately for her, there was a car coming by and she stepped out and waved down the car. And to my horror, a car pulled up right beside me. It had big lights on the top. They weren't on. Had a big decal on the door. And the passenger door was opened by a big man on the inside. And I looked inside and there was a guy. He had a uniform on and he had a big gun on his hip. And he asked me if I would get into the car with him. So not only was I lost, not only was I experiencing being afraid of this girl that was trying to help me, but now a man with a gun was trying to stick me into his car. I was terrified. Well, I remember the girl got into the back seat of the car with me, and there was bars there between the back seat and the front seat so that the bad guy can't get the good guy, who was the policeman. He was really trying to help me. It wasn't too long after that, my mom and dad were frantically looking for me, and probably seeing the police car, they thought maybe he will help us. And as they got close to the police car, they probably heard me and they found me. And I remember that still to this day, and I was very little. It's one of my earliest childhood memories of being lost. Well, Jesus said he came to seek and to save the lost. Now, when he said that at Zacchaeus' house there, he wasn't talking to a bunch of people who were there and they're like, I wonder how we get home because I'm lost. No, he was talking about how they were spiritually lost. They were disconnected from God. And Jesus' journey, as we remember last week, we talked about, we saw Good Friday and we had Easter Sunday. So Good Friday, Jesus is crucified. On Easter Sunday, he rises from the dead. And that whole story of Easter is about Jesus coming to earth, sacrificing himself so that he could make a connection between God and us. And he becomes the one that we connect with God through by putting our trust in him. So Jesus came to the earth to, as he saw people that were broken and lost, to bring them back into relationship with God through what he had done. So that's kind of our take on Jesus and how he saw the world. He saw the world as a place where people needed someone desperately to reach out to them and he was that person. So we're going to give you a little worksheet. It's there. You'll be able to find it, and you can kind of work through that, and you can scan it and send it to me. I'd love to hear your stories. We want to hear some of your lost stories, if you've ever been lost and what that was like. So hope you have a great week coming up. We look forward to seeing you next week.